a film excursion into past events which formed the patterns by which we live today.
Retrospect is brought to you by the Office of Civil and Defense Mobilization in cooperation with your local Civil Defense Office and your local station. And now here's your host, Douglas Edwards.
Each post-war period since the dawn of man has brought with it a wild period of restoration, reorganization, and just plain irresponsibility. But none of them hold a candle to the fantastic period of the wacky years, 10 of them, making whoopee and ain't we got fun, that followed World War I. Returning from the battlefields of Europe, the American doughboy marched into the roaring 20s to discover a new and different America. He found a nation basking in the sunshine of prosperity. He found a carefree, giddy society in which everyone was the life of the party. He found the flapper, wearing skirts higher and stockings lower, who would share his bed of roses for 10 dizzy, high-flying years, and then he would discover that his wonderful utopia had a built-in trapdoor. In 1920, two radical changes were made in America. The first, woman's suffrage. The voting booth had gone coeducational. The ladies considered it quite a feather in their caps. The shock would send the returning doughboy to the nearest saloon, and there he would discover the second change, something called prohibition. While he was away, someone had given the country back to the Puritans. America had gone bone dry. But the doughboy would soon discover the bootlegger, and, armed with 10 years of inspired literature, a hip flask, and a flapper, he would sit back and watch the headlines roll by. And there were headlines aplenty. Sacco and Vanzetti, one of the most controversial murder trials of all time. In Dayton, Tennessee, the trial of John Scopes, accused of assaulting the book of Genesis by teaching evolution in the public schools. For the prosecution, the Honorable William Jennings Bryan, defender of the faith. For the defense and the infidels, Clarence Darrow. The court-martial of Brigadier General Billy Mitchell, envisioning a future when the airplane would play a vital role in time of war, Mitchell put his outspoken views in a book called Our Air Force. The book criticized national defense policies. Mitchell was court-martialed and suspended from the service. While President Harding played the tuba, government oil reserves were being turned over to private interests. Harding died before the full impact of the Teapot Dome scandal hit the nation's headlines. In 1926, the feminine hearts of America went to pieces. Outside of Campbell's funeral parlor in New York, mounted police became frantic trying to keep a crowd of 30,000 tearful mourners from open rioting. Rudolph Valentino, the great lover, the Latin with the bedroom eyes that enslaved women and drove men to despair, was dead. Charles Lindbergh, all the world would come to know him as the Lone Eagle. All other news disappeared from the headlines after the young Minnesotan took off from Mitchell Field, New York, and 33 and 1/2 hours later set down the Spirit of St. Louis at Le Bourget Field in Paris, the first man to fly solo across the Atlantic. During the madness of Prohibition, Al Capone emerged as public enemy number one. While the country was dry, his take was $100 million a year. In 1927, Al Jolson blazed the trail of talking pictures with the jazz singer. The experiment was a sensational success. Movie attendance jumped 60 million in 2 years. The silent film died a quiet, sudden death. To a carefree, happy, wealthy America, it seemed there would be no end to Coolidge prosperity, and they were right. The end came with Hoover prosperity. But if movies were wired for sound, the economy was not. On October 29, 1929, the stock market crashed. The memorable Variety headline put it better: Wall Street lays an egg. After 10 years of wild prosperity, there was nothing left but ticker-tape dreams and the tear-filled rims of rose-colored glasses. Well, now, let's take a moment off from the past for a vital message about the present. There are many important issues facing the American public today. All of them center on one word: survival. Yours, mine, the survival of the entire free world. We must realize that the goal of Soviet leaders is domination of the world by communism. They intend to use all means, economic, propaganda, perhaps even military, to reach this goal. Total war requires total defense. The Office of Civil and Defense Mobilization points out that military might alone is not enough. The director of OCDM has called upon every American to prepare his home and family against possible attack. On these programs, we will bring you the facts on civilian preparedness and the need for an effective civil defense. Many people ask, why do we need civil defense? It's a fair question, and there are many valid answers. To give some of those answers, we have with us Dr. Paul McGrath, Deputy Director of Intelligence and National Security Affairs for the Office of Civil and Defense Mobilization in Washington, D.C. Dr. McGrath, we've all seen pictures of nuclear bombs. We know the tremendous destruction they cause. We've heard about the effects of radiation. Now, facing all this, do you honestly believe survival is possible in a nuclear war?
Of course I believe it, but let me emphasize that my belief is substantiated by facts. The Office of Civil and Defense Mobilization, the Atomic Energy Commission, and many independent research groups have done a great deal of study on the problem of radioactive fallout. So they have come up with one sensible answer: home shelters. For example, a shelter like this one would give excellent protection against radiation. A recent study of national preparedness concluded that adequate shielding is the only effective means of preventing radiation casualties. Another study proved that the simple addition of fallout shelters in every home could reduce our casualties by 75%.
With so many potential trouble spots in the world, nuclear war could erupt at any time, I take it.
Well, that's certainly true, but here's another reason for the importance of fallout shelters and a prepared population. If we're going to stop communist encroachments throughout the world, we might be forced to make decisions carrying the risk of war. Our president can make these decisions with greater confidence if our people are prepared.
And you think civil defense is the answer?
Yes. Considering the powerful nuclear weapons that are in the arsenals of nations today, an effective deterrent that could tip the balance in our favor would be a prepared population. Now, naturally, we will always need a strong military force, but we have a strong military force. We also need a prepared people.
Well, Dr. McGrath, how about the Russians? Do they have a civil defense?
Yes, indeed. They've had an intensive program for years, and the Soviet government has required everyone to take a minimum of 46 hours of civil defense training during the past few years. Now, the Soviet Civil Defense Organization reaches into the life of every Soviet citizen. Now, here are some actual Soviet training posters. As you can see, they are giving their people much the same kind of information that we give. Of course, the big difference is this: the Russians are compelled to take the training courses and to learn the material and to prepare their homes.
Let's take an example. If an attack on the United States ever came, well, couldn't the military take care of the civilians?
Well, the task of the military is to conduct military operations. Primarily, they would be carrying the war to the enemy. Initially, we civilians would be on our own. That's our job as civilians to take care of ourselves so that we could recover and win.
Well, those are certainly very convincing facts, Dr. McGrath. We've heard them, we've listened to them very carefully, I'm sure. Now tell us something equally as important. What do we do about them?
Well, it's time to act on the facts, Mr. Edwards. If our people are to be prepared at home, they must decide to take the necessary steps. Now, the Office of Civil and Defense Mobilization provides the information and training, and it's up to each family to get the information, to study the information, and to act on it, so that no matter what happens, our nation will be prepared and ready.
I certainly hope we shall be. We've heard the facts. We've learned part of the answer from Dr. Paul McGrath. Now we must do something about it. Poverty, said Aristotle, is the parent of revolution and crime. Since 1900, the great majority of the people of Cuba have lived in poverty. Since 1900, Cuban politics has been a hotbed of crime and revolution. After the Spanish-American War, the land which had known no political freedom in 400 years of Spanish rule suddenly gained independence. From that time on, political corruption and public unrest have dominated the Cuban scene. President Theodore Roosevelt intervened to settle the new nation's first internal disorder in 1906. Cuba then enjoyed an 18-year period of relative calm until Gerardo Machado became her 5th president in 1924. In his first 4-year term, Machado increased the protection of Cuban industry and carried through a number of reforms. But by 1928, he began to show dictatorial tendencies. Using terrorist methods, he ensured himself another 4 years in office. His campaign of terror continued until 1933. Then the army deserted him. The Machado regime was overthrown and replaced by a provisional government headed by Carlos de Cespedes. A month later, the country was the scene of renewed rioting. There was mutiny in the army, a mutiny supported by university students, intellectuals, and professionals. The Cespedes government toppled before it ever had a chance to get started. Cubans cheered the leader of the army mutiny, an obscure army sergeant named Fulgencio Batista, seen on the left. The gentleman in the middle, Ramon Grau San Martin, became the new president. Batista was promoted to colonel and placed at the head of the army. From there, he became the real power in Cuban politics. Between 1934 and 1940, Batista installed 7 different presidents in office. He consolidated his own power by allowing the communists to organize politically, which gave him the backing of labor and set the stage for him to run for the presidency in 1940. Amid charges of election frauds, he was elected by a large majority. He legalized the communist-controlled labor organizations and assumed leadership of Cuban unions. Batista respected the constitutional provision prohibiting re-election and did not run in 1944. But in 1952, he came back to lead another brief revolt. He was once again dictator of Cuba, suspending the Constitution and stifling political opposition. But Batista had one opponent who refused to be stifled. And on New Year's Day, 1959, Fidel Castro brought about the last of Cuba's political upheavals. At first, many Americans saw the bearded revolutionist as Cuba's long-awaited emancipator. But Dr. Castro gradually made America hostile to his policies. He inaugurated a revolutionary agrarian reform program and began to appropriate American-owned property. These acts were followed by Castro's violent tirades against the United States. Cuba, a very small island with very large problems. We hope we've provided an interesting insight into the past, and we hope we've underlined the importance of the fact that simple, inexpensive home shelters can save millions of lives in case of nuclear war. As little as $100 can buy your family insurance against the greatest threat of nuclear attack, radioactive fallout. It's up to each of us to take the responsibility for preparing our homes and families. The Office of Civil and Defense Mobilization has prepared several home shelter plans and makes them available to you without cost. Contact your local Civil Defense Office or write to OCDM, Battle Creek, Michigan. This is Douglas Edwards saying goodbye for now and reminding you to be on hand when we again bring you the great news events and personalities in retrospect.
Retrospect, starring Douglas Edwards, was brought to you by the Office of Civil and Defense Mobilization in cooperation with your local Civil Defense Office and your local station. Survival in the nuclear age is a personal responsibility, touching every American family. Make sure you take part. Learn the facts about civil defense preparedness. Start your home preparedness program today. The prepared family builds a prepared nation. Civil defense is an American tradition.
Hello everyone, welcome. I'm Skip Elsheimer, and welcome to our 80 Geeks Lunchtime streaming show, where I show old 16mm films from our collection of over 27,000, soon to be, 36,000. I just got a phone call this morning from a truck from the shipping company that's going to be delivering 13 pallets of films. It's going to be at least 8,800 films, maybe closer to 9,500 films. So that's what I'm doing Friday morning. Yeah. Be careful what you wish for. That's what I'm saying, is that this was like, yeah, this is a great idea. We should do this. We should do this. And then suddenly, oops, wow, yeah, it's actually happening. So thank you for your excuse me. Oh, thank you for your continued support for doing this. And I guarantee you're going to see a lot of these films. We've come up with a workflow that you guys will see a bunch of stuff. We'll premiere it for you guys. In the meantime, here's a film about mobile. Oh, let me just say quickly about Retrospect. Retrospect was this series that the Office of Civil Defense, Department of Civil Defense, did. And what they did is, I think they were trying to have on-point messages about civil defense, about fallout shelters, about how to repair in case of nuclear attack. But they knew that it was going to be kind of dry. And so they were like, well, what if we give some programming to TV stations so that they can run this and people can watch it, but then it's sponsored by Civil Defense. So the formatting of this is that you have Douglas Edwards, who intros it, and then they show a bunch of kind of stock footage of a certain historical time period or, some sort of theme. Then they have like a middle section where he interviews someone from the Office of or Department of Civil Defense. Then they go back and they do a completely different segment. And so you have this, a show. It's a program, and it's free content for a TV station. So you can give it to them, and they'll film. What I'm going to show you is a handy-dandy filmmaking film. And as a child, I always wanted to make movies and made a couple, thanks to a wonderful county library program. I always tried to do it on my own, but just did not have the discipline to keep on it. But here we go. This is how you make, and this has a really wonderful / annoying song. Enjoy.
Great camera, check. Exposure meter, check. Tripod, check. Film, check. Tape recorder, check. Microphone, check. Tape, check. Spare batteries, check. Lens tissue, check. Shot list, check. Okay.
Well, this year at school, our class started a filmmaking project.
Yeah, we learned how to use a Super 8 movie camera, light meter, tape recorder, and all sorts of other equipment.
So this weekend, our school said we could borrow their equipment and start shooting our movie.
The hardest thing was trying to pick a subject for our film.
Yeah, we went through all sorts of ideas.
We finally figured out that since we're shooting movies, we should find a subject that has some movement and action.
That's why we decided to make a film about jousting. There are horses, knights, ladies in costume, and lots of excitement.
Jousting is an official state sport, and it's been carried on ever since before the American Revolution.
Basically, each rider tries to land little rings that are suspended above the course.
Anyway, it sure turned out to be a beautiful day to go out in the country and do some shooting.
Pack away your film for a day in the country, making a movie on an afternoon. You planned your day ahead of time, your camera's all ready, great things will come of filming for fun. All the things I see and know, I've got them on film to show. There's nothing in this world I can't see. Gee, my camera and me. My camera and me. There's much to be said for one's presentation, keeping your audience in mind. Pieces will fit for editing later, to film a charging horse who runs along the course. All the things I see and know, I've got them on film to show. There's nothing in this world I can't see. Gee, my camera and me. My camera and me. Cameras and tripod simple. Everyone should try it, and it's shooting a film. All the things I see and know, I've got them on film to show. There's nothing in this world I can't see. Gee, my camera and me. My camera and me.
This Super 8 camera is like most of the ones you can buy these days. It has a viewfinder that looks right through the camera lens. A reflex viewfinder, and it's the best kind to have because the picture you see is exactly what the film is getting. The controls on the camera are really very simple. It has a dial to set the camera speed. 18 frames per second is the standard speed for Super 8, and a dial to set the lens aperture. The lens aperture controls the amount of light reaching the film, and on lots of new cameras it is set automatically by a light meter built right into the camera. This camera has the automatic aperture, but we also learned how to use a separate exposure meter so that we can always use cameras that have to be set manually. To use a light meter, first you look on the film box to get the ASA number. This number refers to the sensitivity of the film, and you set the light meter so that it shows that number in the ASA window. We're using Kodachrome 2 and it says ASA 25, so I set the meter to ASA 25 here. Next, the meter is used to figure out how bright the light is. When you hold it properly, the needle points to a number in the little window. You set the meter dial to this number, and the scale tells you how to set the camera. It's quite simple once you figure it out. Of course, there are all kinds of different exposure meters, but each one comes with an...
Just press the record button and turn it on to start recording. It's a good idea to tape a short test to make sure you're getting the right amount of recording volume. And you should always hold the microphone as close as possible to the sound you're recording.
Champion.
I used the recorder to tape an interview with one of the jousters. I figured we could use her voice in the narration of our film.
I think it looks a lot easier than it really is because you have to be able to ride the horse and hold the lance and make the time through the track and get the ring all at the same time.
Could you tell us what jousting is all about?
Well, the object is to have the horse trained to run through the track, and you keep your undivided attention on this ring. The minute your horse spins around, you get sight of this ring and you concentrate on it. The horse must run on its own through the track.
Another thing we learned is always to use a tripod for shooting things that don't move themselves, like buildings or trees. This is especially important when the lens is set to get close-ups. Without the tripod, our shots would wobble around too much.
Of course, if you want to handhold the camera, you should use both hands to try to keep it as steady as possible. From watching films at school, we learned that you should try to shoot each subject from a couple of different angles. First, you should try to get a wide view, or long shot as they call it, so that your viewer can see the whole subject. Then you should move closer and get medium shots and close-ups to show the interesting details. Later, these different shots can be edited together to make a more interesting story.
Memories are made on days like today, but memories are hard to show all your friends. Capturing the story with camera and recorder, memories will be something to see. All the things I see and know, I've got them on film to show. There's nothing in this world I can't see. Gee, my camera and me. My camera and me. There's a lot to see with your camera. Subjects are constantly moving. Keep your head cool. Always remember, carefully choose the things that come to your mind. All the things I see and know, I've got them on film to show. There's nothing in this world I can't see. Gee, my camera and me. My camera camera and me.
Well, we sure had a lot of fun shooting our film.
Yeah, but shooting the film is really just the beginning. The next step is editing all these shots into a finished film.
But you can see how we did that in another movie called The Handy Dandy Film Editing Film.
All the things I see and know, I've got them on film to show. There's nothing in this world I can't see. Gee, my camera and me. My camera and me.
So someone said, that song can't be nearly as annoying as Uncle Smiley. Well, guess what? It probably is. Hey, I apologize for the internet was flaking out over here, so I had to kind of quickly shift over some things. So I'm sorry for the delays and the buffering and all that annoying stuff that comes with embracing more than 100 years of technology. Yeah, a 16 millimeter film is almost 100 years old, and the internet is relatively in its infancy, but we still have problems. All right, so this next film answers a question that many of you have. Oh, and let me just say thank you, Bucky Grimm, for the coffee. You can actually buy coffee for AV Geeks, and we'll be needing a lot of it. Caffeine is the drug of choice at AV Geeks. It is the lubrication for our nervous systems. So thank you, Bucky. Yeah, so this next film is, it's kind of a weird title. It's How Rodney the River Rat Made Money Grow. So, why did they use a river rat? I don't know. Let's just watch and find out.
Once upon a time, there was a very clever river rat named Rodney. He lived in a neat little house tucked away in a marshy riverbank. It had neat little rooms and neat little nooks, neat little closets and neat little furniture. In fact, Rodney River Rat was a neat little guy, but he had one problem. Sometimes he got carried away with ideas before he thought them out. One night when his TV set was broken, he opened the paper and read an ad which said, "If you put your money in a bank, it will grow." "Wow," said Rodney. "Capital idea. That's what I'll do. I'll put my money in a bank." But then he thought, wait a minute. If I just put my money in there, that's not as good as if I put lots of money in. I have only a little bit saved. It was carefully hidden away under the cheese board. So Rodney decided to call up all his friends to see how much they had saved. He knew the ants had been busy carrying food about. He knew the squirrels had filled the tree trunks with nuts. And he knew Mr. and Mrs. Sparrow had a nest egg. He also knew they had traded all these things at the marketplace for money. Rodney River Rat was so excited he could hardly sleep that night. The next morning, as soon as the birds started singing, and he knew all his friends were up, he ran out of his house and onto the knoll where everyone was getting ready to do their marketing. "Wait a minute," he shouted. "I've got a terrific idea. Last night when my TV wasn't working, I read in the paper that if you put your money in a bank, it grows. So I think we should just gather all our money and put it in a bank. And I know just the bank, the river bank, where I live." The other animals got very, very excited, and Sammy Squirrel said, "Wow, just think of all the money I'll have next winter. I can even give a party." Randy Raccoon said, "I can even get a new winter coat." Brownie Bear said, I'd like to have money for wall-to-wall carpeting in my cave, so if I fall out of bed while I'm hibernating, I won't hurt myself. And all the animals became so excited they talked all at once, because they all had something they really wanted, and they never had enough money. When they finally finished talking, they looked at Rodney River Rat, who was so excited he could hardly breathe. And he almost whispered out loud, "There's something I've wanted all my life. A car with my initials on it. A real car with red upholstery and a stereo, but mostly my initials right up in front." Everyone said, "Ooh," and "ah." Then they gathered around Rodney and said, "Yes, your plan is wonderful. Just tell us how to do it. So Rodney announced, "It's simple. Run home as fast as your furry legs can carry you and bring back all your money. And tonight, under the light of the full moon, we'll deposit the money in my house, the riverbank." And the animals shouted, "Hooray for Rodney River Rat!" And they ran home as fast as they could. Sammy Squirrel got the biggest pillowcase he could find and stuffed all his money into it. The other animals did the same thing with their money. And that night, when the moon was the brightest, down the path came the animals. First came the squirrel family, carrying all of their money. Next in line were the raccoons, husbands, wives, and cousin raccoons. And right behind them were Mr. and Mrs. Sparrow, and even the baby sparrow stayed up late that night. And they all marched into Rodney's house in the riverbank. Rodney sat at the dining room table with a very large ledger and a feather pen dipped in blackberry juice. As each animal marched through the dining room, he would record very carefully the exact amount of money and the location of each nook and cranny he was going to put it in. Then, just as carefully, he gave each animal a handwritten receipt and explained, "This is your bank book, your river bank book. Take this home and keep it. It will tell you exactly how much money you have in the riverbank." And each animal took his book and marked his paw print in it to indicate that this was so. Then they all went home and slept very well that night. On the next day, they could hardly wait to get to Rodney's house. They knocked on Rodney's door and said, let us in, so we can watch our money grow." So Rodney opened the door and said, "Come right in. Our bank is always open." The animals hurried in and raced to see in the nooks and crannies. The money was all there, exactly where they had put it, but nothing had grown. Rodney scratched his head and said, "Possibly it's too soon. Please come back tomorrow." That night, nobody slept as well as the night before. In fact, for the next 3 days, the animals came to the bank every morning, but still, their money hadn't grown. So Rodney decided there had to be something wrong. He decided to look in a book to find out how to make things grow. And he read that in order to make things grow, you must water and feed them. And be sure to have plenty of light and sunshine. "Of course," he exclaimed. "That's our problem." And he called all the animals and said, "Come to the bank immediately. I know why our money isn't growing. Bring anything you have that holds water, buckets, jars, or pots. We forgot to water our money." So the animals gathered together all the pots they had and hurried to Rodney's riverbank. When they arrived, Rodney announced, "Form a water brigade." He gave each animal a container and lined the animals up until they'd stretched to the river. Sammy Squirrel was first in line. He dunked his pail into the river, turned around and splashed the water from his pail into a pot that was held by Randy Raccoon, who did the same thing until all the way down the line the water was finally poured into all the neat little nooks and neat little crannies of Rodney's house. When this was done, Rodney smiled to himself and said, "Now our money should grow." But he was worried, because everything in his house was cold and damp, and he began to sneeze. The next day, the animals all came back and looked around. Nothing had happened, except Rodney River Rat had a very bad cold. Rodney shook his head sadly and said, "Okay, here's the next step. In order to make our money grow, we must have lots of light. Everyone hurry home and come back with something that makes light. Candles, lanterns, flashlights, anything that's bright, okay?" Sammy Squirrel came back with 5 fireflies in a jar. Randy Raccoon brought a jack-o'-lantern left over from Halloween, and Brownie Bear carried a big flashlight. Then all the animals gathered outside the riverbank and turned on all their lights. The lights were so bright and so shiny, they woke up the wise old owl who sat very high in a tree. "Who on earth is disturbing my sleep?" he demanded. "What's going on down there?" So Rodney said, "We are turning on grow lights so our money will grow." The wise old owl flapped down and said,
Where on earth did you ever get such a ridiculous idea?
So Rodney told him the entire story. The wise old owl just shook his head and replied,
You've got the right idea, but the wrong plan.
Rodney and all the animals said together,
What do you mean? Sit down, said the owl. I'll tell you how you can really make your money grow. You don't put it in the riverbank, for goodness sakes, you put it in a savings bank.
The animals decided to do what the owl suggested. They all met at the tree and formed a neat line with the wise old owl in front. In they marched to the savings bank, 2 by 2, each animal holding a pillowcase full of money. The wise old owl led them to a room with a big desk. Behind the desk sat the bank manager, who looked almost as wise as the wise old owl. The owl called each of his friends by name, and they stepped up and shook hands with the bank manager, who smiled and said, "Welcome. Since this is your first visit, I'd like to show you how our savings bank works." Then the manager handed each of the animals a little pink card and said, "This is where you put your name, your address, and how much money you wish to deposit. Then we give you an account number, so all your money will never get lost." The animals quickly sat down in a circle and did as he said. After the bank manager collected all the cards, he said, "Bring your money and follow me to a teller's window." Sammy Squirrel whispered to Randy Raccoon,
What's a teller?
and Randy answered, "Oh, I don't know. Must be somebody who has a lot to say." "And would you like to hear how a bank makes its money grow?" the manager asked.
I'll say, Brownie Bear replied. We sure didn't have much luck.
"Well," the manager began, "the bank takes the money that everyone like you has brought in and uses that money to earn more money. For example, the bank might loan it to someone to add another room on their house."
Oh, boy, Brownie replied. Could I get a loan to buy my wall-to-wall carpeting?
"Maybe so," said the manager, "but mostly people use our money to buy houses, though loaning money for home improvements is a big way the bank uses money to make more money. For example, Mr. and Mrs. Sparrow could borrow $24 from our bank for a swimming pool. They can pay back the bank $1 a month for 24 months plus 10 cents a month interest. Now, the interest is what the bank charges you for borrowing their money. That's where the bank gets the money to make your savings account grow. We call it earning interest. When the bank takes your money and lends it to make more money, they pay you for letting them use your money. That's how your money grows. We call it earning interest." The wise old owl just nodded his head and said,
That's because it's so interesting.
"Would you like to see where we keep some of the money?" asked the manager. "Is it cold and damp?" asked Rodney. "Because I've already got the sniffles." The bank manager smiled politely and said, "Come with me and see for yourself." They all followed him to the back of the bank, where they came upon an enormous steel door with a big wheel on it. "Okay, who wants to try to open the door?" asked the manager. Rodney raised his hand. "Since I have the most experience in banking, I think I should do it." The wise old owl just winked at the bank manager and said,
Yes, why not let Rodney try it?
Rodney jumped up on the wheel and pushed and pulled and heaved and hoed. He even wrapped his tail around the wheel and turned with all his might, but the door wouldn't budge. So the manager said, "Rodney, you can't open it, because we keep it locked at all times so the money will be safe. That's why it's called a safe." Then he added, "Would you like me to open it for you?" The animals got very excited and all shouted, "Yes, yes, yes!" The bank manager explained, "Now the only way you can open it is with secret numbers." So he dialed the numbers and the giant door swung open. The animals all stood back and said, "Oh!" And the owl turned to the animals and asked,
Isn't it more fun to put your money in a savings bank where it really grows and where you don't have to get your feet wet looking at it? And especially, he said in a big loud voice, where you don't need lights to keep you awake.
By this time, the owl had been up much too long and was getting very grumpy. So the manager walked all the animals to the teller's window and said, "I'm really glad I got to meet all of you. And I want you to know that I'm always behind my desk if you just want to stop in and ask how your money is growing. So please come by and see me anytime." So all the animals marched up to the teller's window with their money and opened their very own bank accounts. Then they all went home and slept very well, knowing their money was not only safe in the bank, but was being used and growing larger every day. The very next winter, it was clear that all the money had grown. The animals' money had earned more money. To celebrate, Sammy Squirrel had the biggest party the animals had ever seen. He invited all his friends, including the bank manager, who couldn't help but see how happy the animals were. Randy Raccoon had his new fur coat. Brownie Bear was showing everyone pictures of his grass-green carpet. Even the wise old owl was happier because he was finally getting some sleep. But the best part of the whole party was when Rodney River Rat drove up the driveway in the longest, the biggest, the shiniest, most beautiful new car the animals had ever seen. And right smack in the middle of the front of the car were the initials RR.
So I got that film from Buffalo Public Schools, and obviously that was something that was made for them, or made by Buffalo banks, and so this is probably a rare film. It's not a very good film. This is what we call iconographic. So basically, it's illustrated panels, and the camera will pan or zoom or do whatever. This happened a lot with, there's a company called Weston Woods that made a lot of films like this. This was a quick way to have a film with narration and have some level of movement. But if I watched this film as a child, the first question I would have is, why do animals require money? Wouldn't it be better for food? Wouldn't it be better if they banked food in some way, or banked some other thing that they needed, not this weird human commodity that supposedly is, it just doesn't seem right. So yeah, this film is pointless and horrible and stupid. Tara, thank you for coffee. It's been such a long time, I forgot how to pronounce your name. And somebody is like pinging, messaging me. I'll mute that when I get a chance. Anyways, this film is about mobile labs. Any questions?
The same organisms that we find here in this water and that we see under the microscope here, can we find these same organisms in our drinking water?
I have a little sister at home. She don't eat the paint, but she plays with it, and I would like to know if there's any danger towards that.
Suppose you're listening to a radio and you're using an earphone. How long before the noise will affect your ears?
How come in the morning when you turn on the water's cloudy?
First of all, when water leaves...
Questions from high school students awaken suddenly to the fact that science may play an important part in their lives. All too often, high school science students have been unable to relate what they are learning to the society they live in. To demonstrate that science is relevant to the local community, a mobile science laboratory is now traveling from high school to high school in Washington, D.C. It stays at one school location from 1 to 2 weeks, supplementing and enriching the regular classroom programs. The lab is a pilot project created at Federal City College in Washington in cooperation with the public schools of the District of Columbia. and backed by a grant from the National Science Foundation.
Not more or less.
It's a working laboratory that stresses topics of concern to local citizens: air, water, and noise pollution, nutrition, cigarette smoking, drugs. It shows how these problems affect the community and what can be done to solve them.
A child who is eating paint can die, can become blind, mentally retarded for life.
What we have in this beaker here is what we consider as polluted water.
What happens is man breathes carbon dioxide under normal conditions to the upper portion of the lungs. But inasmuch as carbon monoxide is in the air, it acts as a catalyst, and it causes man to inhale it deeper into the lungs where he cannot throw it out.
There are 5 scientific specialties presented in the lab: physics, mathematics, applied science, chemistry, and biology. Science undergraduates at Federal City College present the material.
Place the plant under the bell jar. And then put the sodium sulfite into the first filtering flask, and the sodium carbonate into the second filtering flask. The next thing you want to do is to pour the sodium sulfite one into each filtering flask. What will happen? We have mixed the chemicals, and as soon as we pour the sulfuric acid into the filtering flask, you'll see a reaction, and the gases will flow into the chamber.
High school students rotate from specialty to specialty, actually participating in practical experiments. Some may discover for themselves the damaging effects of sulfur dioxide, a major pollutant of the air. Others may test samples of paint from their own homes. The students process the paint samples and are able to discover for themselves whether or not the paint in their homes is a potential hazard to young children. If the final step produces a yellow precipitate, the presence of lead is confirmed.
Sound is beautiful, but noise is hazardous to the hearing, right?
Still another group may learn about noise pollution, and in the process becomes acquainted with sophisticated instrumentation.
By varying the frequency.
We're going to talk in terms of animal life and water. Now,
Others may be learning about water pollution, comparing the behavior of animals in water known to be fresh against their behavior in water taken from local rivers and streams.
there's no life in it, and we begin to pour junk into it.
The sun helps to trap the particles.
Still others may duplicate the techniques used in municipal water purification plants, filtering samples from the local water source, then testing them for purity.
All the way down here, it passes over these rocks. These rocks are just natural.
While this is going on, other students are learning about mathematical variables and percentages, working with data from the various experiments. Math is given meaning by relating it to the experiments the students themselves are performing.
There's a 6 down the bottom here, right? So one of the considerations is what number...
In off-school hours and during the summer months, the lab, in coordination with community groups, remains open. Parents and other people from the neighborhood are encouraged to come in and learn how science is relevant to them. The aim here, as well as that of the school program, is only partly to provide learning about scientific matters. Equally important is generating appreciation, interest, and even enthusiasm about science, learning about the role it plays in urban life. In some cases, it may be a very personal awakening to a problem in the student's own home.
How come people can drink that water?
It may encourage some students to want to help solve the problems of our environment. It may even awaken interest that could launch others into careers in science. For the college students doing the teaching, there is a special benefit, for they are demonstrating to themselves, as well as to others, that science is relevant in today's world, and through it, they are able to make a meaningful contribution.
Hello. You caught me mid-email with somebody, so I need to thread up the next film. But it's interesting that film, it would go to urban schools who don't have the resources, and you set up these mobile labs, which are great. But you also show them how toxic their environment is that they live in. You know, if you started testing for lead in water, like tap water, you'd see how toxic it is. And same with noise pollution and air pollution. All these things are great in teaching science, but it also shows that low-income areas tend to have more pollution in general. So, anyway, interesting. I'm sure they don't do this anymore. All right, so this next film is this is another film from Buffalo Public Schools. It's called Survival for Sportsmen, and yeah, I haven't seen it, so I don't know what it's about. So this is exciting. This is why we do what we do. Why I have this machine here to show us films that I have not seen yet. So if there's any nudity or gore, I'll try to turn it off in time, but maybe, who knows what happens. All right, here we go.
You are about to see a swimming pool demonstration of how a sportsman might survive in deep water should he fall in dressed in heavy clothing. This demonstration is conducted by Mr. Edmund Mungeon, Director of Water Safety for the American National Red Cross, Washington, D.C. Mr. Mungeon.
Hi. I'd like to introduce Miss Pam Good, who is a lifeguard and instructor at this pool here at Norton Air Force Base, and she's going to help us with the first part of our demonstration. This is Ralph Flanagan, and we'll see Ralph a little later in the demonstration. There have been many myths and misunderstandings about how a human body floats in the water. The average person will float if they relax, learn breath control, and assume the body position that is the best one. Now, this is a jellyfish float position with the body lying prone, the face down in the water, and so the average person should be able to float doing this if she has good breath control. I'd like Pam to do the same thing again, and this time I want you to exhale. Let your breath out, and we'll see what difference this makes. In other words, she was floating right near the surface, and when she just lets the air out of her lungs, you notice how she sinks very quickly. That's fine. Now, we mentioned that the body's specific gravity is right about 1 on the average person, and we'll see what difference simply a solid brick makes. Here I have an ordinary 6-pound brick, a dead weight, and Pam is going to float in the jellyfish float position, and with the brick on the back, let's see what happens. You see, just a simple 6-pound weight causes her to sink, even though she was floating perfectly easily before. Now, Pam, would you go from that jellyfish to a prone position? Now, floating face down, if Pam will lift her arms, let her legs come up behind her, she'll float face down in a stretched out position. This is, again, relaxation, breath control, body position. All right, Pam, we'll now try a floating with the face out. And so starting with the legs down, with the arms out, Pam is going to start floating in a vertical position. Now, as she brings her arms back, she gets better body balance, the legs start coming up, and finally, with the arms extended over the head back, in a relaxed position, her feet comes up. And so not everyone can float in this horizontal position, but most people can learn how to float in either vertical, balanced, or a horizontal position. Now, Pam, just to float around nice and easily, for those people whose specific gravity doesn't allow them to float motionless, everyone can learn how to just float easily on your back with simple, easy movements of the arms and the legs, and you could stay afloat like this with minimum movement for quite a long time. Another skill we're going to show you is a skill called survival floating. Survival floating starts in the jellyfish float position. You take a breath, you hold it for a few seconds, and when you want to breathe, you lift your head up high enough to take a breath, you drop your head and float again. When you want to breathe, you press down, lift your head up, drop your head, and hang in the floating position. Now, this survival floating skill, when learned, and it's a very important skill, would enable the average person to stay afloat for long periods of time and would come in very, very helpful in any emergency. Now we'll bring Ralph Flanagan back on. Ralph is with the Los Angeles chapter of the American Red Cross. And first of all, we're going to see how much Ralph weighs in just his swimming trunks. How much?
199.
199. Ralph is going to don all of this sportsman or hunting gear. We have there some long underwear, woolen socks, a woolen shirt, hunting pants, the hunting jacket, the hip boots, gloves, and a cap. I want to point out that none of this material or gear contains any built-in flotation. Now, we have seen what a simple 6-pound weight does to the body buoyancy, and now Ralph has put on all of this gear. Let's see what he weighs in full hunting gear with the hunting gear still dry.
216.
216 pounds. Okay, we'll mark this down here. Now Ralph is putting his decoys in. Be careful, Ralph. There he goes. Now what happens when a hunter or a sportsman falls in with all this gear? If you don't panic and you know what you're doing, actually nothing. Ralph floated immediately to the surface because air gets caught in his boots, air gets caught in his jacket, and you'll see him just floating there. Now, Ralph, just hang there without moving and let's see what happens. The average person thinks that if you fall in with hip boots, you sink to the bottom like a stone, and this is not so. In fact, it's better, if the water's cold, to leave your clothes on. Now, what a person can do if they had to stay out for a little longer and they couldn't get back to the boat, you can use your clothing for inflation. Now, Ralph can lift up his jacket and he can splash air into the jacket, as he's doing from underneath, and this will bubble up the jacket, as you can see from the back. Turn around, Ralph, and we'll see that air in the back of your jacket, and this will assist you to stay up without any effort. In case you want to swim through the water, and Ralph, in this case, swim over to the decoys, because decoys will float. And to swim, if with all this clothing on, you attempted to swim with a crawl stroke, you make little or no progress. The weight of your water-soaked clothing is too much to swim in this style. The best stroke to use is an underwater recovery stroke. Now, Ralph, do just an easy dog paddle, a breaststroke. Let's try an easy breaststroke, for instance. And without working very hard, even the kick is somewhat effective with hip boots on. Decoys will float, and so in this case, Ralph is simply grabbing a couple of the decoys and putting them under his arms, or you could open his jacket and slip them underneath. Oars, bait buckets, flotation objects, all can help to assist you and to stay afloat for a long period of time. Now Ralph is simply turned over and he's now floating on his back with the decoys. Let the decoys go, Ralph, and simply do an easy underwater elementary backstroke combination. Notice he's using mostly his arms and not trying to do a lot of kicking because you'll float in the proper position. Earlier, we saw Pam do a survival floating in just a bathing suit. Now I'd like to have Ralph do this 3 or 4 times to show that even with his boots probably full of water now, he can still do this survival floating skill, starting in a jellyfish fish float position, pressing down when he needs a breath of air, dropping his head forward again and hanging and waiting until he needs another breath of air. He's using a minimum amount of movement and energy, and he could actually do this for a long period of time. All right, Ralph, if you'll swim over to the ladder, and as he's swimming over to the ladder, notice that he's doing a breaststroke arm movement and moving his legs very, very little. Your body balance and your underwater arm action in swimming with full clothing on is the easiest way to maneuver. And notice how relaxed and easy he's moving. He is not working hard. Now, we saw Ralph weighed 199 pounds in just his bathing trunks. We saw that he weighed 216 with all this gear on when it was dry. So this time Ralph is going to step on the scales, and we're going to see what he weighs with all soaked. What's it read, Pam? 266 pounds. In other words, Ralph has added 67 pounds, and just to show that we have no tricks, he's going to fall in again, and with all this weight, what's going to happen? He bobs up to the surface. You notice air is caught in his jacket again. He lifts his heels up so that air is caught in the boots. And the point of this demonstration is this, that anyone, when they find themselves accidentally in the water with clothing on, with gear on, there is no need to panic. The secret is knowing what to do in an emergency, and this information and this knowledge can save your life. Thank you, Ralph. That was very well done. And thank you, Pam.
So, that was pretty great. I mean, it was very specific, but the image of the guy floating as these like plastic duck decoys are floating around him, it just was pretty great. Plus the host's accent is real good. Yeah, so one last film. I think I've decided I'm going to actually buy a pallet jack, so I'm going to go try to figure out if I can get one and if it'll fit in the AV-RV, the minivan. And yeah, that's how we'll deal with Friday. This last film is an interesting one, and I didn't know about this until I actually talked to somebody who went to the Selznick School at the George Eastman House in Rochester, New York, which was part of Kodak, kinda. And supposedly every year, Kodak would have a Young Filmmakers Award. This was, I think, in the 60s and 70s. And my friend was actually, her archive project to graduate from the Selznick School was to go through and catalog, because they were just loose, they were on shelves and boxes, she didn't know what was what. So she went through and inspected everything, cataloged it. There was one year that actually a young Ron Howard won the award, And I think that they gave multiple awards. And what I didn't know at the time is that they actually, Kodak, besides advertising it, they also made copies of these compilation reels to be shown. And I ended up with one. And most of it's so-so. But there's this one bit that is so good. And I clipped it out. And there's some narration at the beginning. And then I did this, and I showed the Handy Danny filmmaker film and the film about stunts for a show I did called Be Your Own Blockbuster that was basically blockbuster or films about film. And this one was just so good. So we'll watch this. This is a segment of the Kodak Young Filmmakers Award. I can't remember what year it is. I'll see if I can look that up. So here we go. Enjoy.
Now here's a real thriller, made by a group headed by 14-year-old Phil Snyder of Lawrence, Long Island. It's a chase in which the good guys are in a light-colored car, the bad guys in black ones. Phil calls this picture Diamonds Are Forever, although readers of the original Ian Fleming novel might have some difficulty in recognizing the story as adapted by Phil. That's James Bond, 007, in the light tan jacket, pitted against the notorious Serafimo Spang.
Come on, come on!
The uncut version of this picture runs 30 action-packed minutes.
You planned your day ahead of time, your camera's all ready. Great things will come of filming for fun. All the things I see and know, I've got them on film to show. There's nothing in this world I can't see. Gee, my camera and me. My camera and me. There's much to be said for one's presentation, keeping your audience in mind. Pieces will fit for editing later. The film a charging horse runs along the course. All the things I see and know, I've got them on film to show. There's nothing in this world I can't see. Gee, my camera and me. My camera and me. Cameras and tripods and other equipment. Seems there are many things that could go wrong. But you'll soon see the techniques are simple. Everyone should try his hand at shooting a film. All the things I see and know, I've got them on film to show. There's nothing in this world I can't see. Gee, my camera and me. My camera and me.
I couldn't just play that song once. I had to play it another time. That film is awesome. It is so great because it just tickles my brain. Because if I was making a film, and that film was made in kind of 1968 probably, or at least it won the 1968 award.
I couldn't just play that song once. I had to play it another time. That film is awesome. It is so great.
Okay, so there's going to be a horrible feedback thing for a while. I apologize for that. Too many windows open. Anyways, somebody mentioned on one of the comments that it was like, yeah, this type of thing was kind of rare. Mostly people just use their home movie cameras to shoot, weddings, birthdays, etc., Christmas. And that's true. There's a vast amount of that. But having done Home Movie Day and having done transferred a bunch of home movies and amateur films, there's a pretty good percentage of people who use their cameras to do fictional narratives and to do things like stop motion. There's a couple of, over the years, I've done a couple of Star Wars things with Star Wars figures where people are doing Star Wars, kids are doing Star Wars figures, simple animation. This one kid did he kind of did a music video for Get a Job, and this is back in the 60s, where he showed his friends doing different jobs, including one was carrying a casket with a wooden Hitler in it, which I found out was there was a wooden Hitler after Hitler was killed himself that they had on display in this grocery store or this drugstore window in downtown Raleigh. And so this kid's neighbor had it, so he used it in this film. But there's a whole, if you look up amateur filmmaking, there's lots and lots of people who did amazing and not so amazing stuff. But this James Bond film is really great because it has, cars, it has people getting shot, it has blood. It's just, it's everything that like an adolescent kid kind of gets into. And so I very much like that film. The narration gets dry after a while, so that's why I faded it out and just kind of brought that music back in because it's so awesome. And speaking of awesome, thank you guys for tuning in. I'm a little high right now because I know that I'm getting a giant batch of films on Friday, and I'm going to have to figure that out. Like, hopefully I'll be done by the time of the show, but I need to figure how I'm going to deal with that. But also, I've had some coffee, and so thank you so much for donating coffee here. If you like what we have been doing, please hit the like and subscribe button. Tell your friends what we're doing. Visit avgeeks.com. There's a place to buy DVDs there and to see other shows that we've done. Very much appreciate your feedback and your comments and you watching and kind of paying attention and appreciating what we do. I certainly would do this in a vacuum, but the fact that there's people out there who are enjoying it or groaning at it, it pushes me over the top. This is my highlight of the day. And so thank you so much for that. And we'll be back tomorrow. And everybody have a good rest of the day. You guys take care.